Okay, guys, we are going to be talking about the foreign exchange market today. Its nickname is the FOREX. Um, so we're going to do a little bit of notes, followed by drawing our key graph quiz number 9, which is our last key graph quiz. Super exciting. And then I am going to go over the first couple of questions to your activity, so that you can kind of get the feel for it and make sure that you guys are on the right track. The PDF version of the key graph number 9, as well as the key to the FOREX practice problems, are online under Wednesday in the 5th 6 weeks calendar. Okay, so quick review. In yesterday's lesson, we saw that the market for loanable funds shows us how financial capital flows into or out of our nation's financial account. And goods and services also flow, but this flow is tracked as balance of payments into and out of our current account. So we need to remember that when we think of financial account, we're mainly talking about different type of savings entering and exiting the United States. And when we are talking about our current account, we're mainly talking about exports and imports, right? Different goods and services entering and exiting the United States. Now, we've also learned that a country's balance of payments on the current account plus its balance of payments on the financial account adds up to 0, right? Because everything flowing in, all the uses of cash, must be equal to all the uses of cash. So therefore, a country that receives a net capital inflow, or a positive financial account, must run a matching current account deficit. And conversely, a country that generates a net capital outflow, or negative financial account, must run a matching current account surplus. So we know that this works, but given that a financial account reflects the movement of capital and a current account reflects the movement of goods and services, what ensures that the balance of payments really does balance? So basically, how do we ensure that these two accounts actually offset each other? Well, the answer lies in exchange rates and determining what the exchange rate is from one currency to the next. So that's what we're going to get to discover today. Before we discuss the foreign exchange market, one thing that I need to preface is that whenever we are purchasing a good produced from another country, we must pay for that good with that country's currency, right? If a Canadian is coming across the border and wants to purchase some Wisconsin cheese, if you're in Wisconsin, are you going to accept Canadian dollars? No, you're going to say, hey, look, I need you to exchange that for US dollars because in the United States we use US dollars. So goods produced within a country must be paid for with that country's currency. So because of this, it's going to require us to exchange one currency to another currency anytime we want to purchase a foreign-made product. So because of that, there is a market called the foreign exchange market. Now, this is not located in any one geographic spot. Rather, it's this global electronic market that traders around the world use to buy and sell currencies. You may have seen it in some shopping malls, definitely in some airports. There's an image on this slide that shows you these digital exchange rates that are constantly fluctuating. So the foreign exchange market is a place where currencies can be exchanged from one currency to another. And because we have so many different international transactions, it's going to require this market to exist. Now, this market is going to be like any other single market that we've already learned. The y-axis is the price, the x-axis is the quantity, and you've got a supply and demand curve. The equilibrium price for the currency is going to be called the exchange rate. And this is the price at which currencies trade. So one thing that we need to wrap our heads around now is that a currency is going to be associated as any other type of good or service that we purchase. There is a demand for different types of currencies and a supply for different types of currencies. So depending upon the forces of the market, you're either going to see an increase in the exchange rate or a decrease in the exchange rate. And so we're going to practice that in just a second. Okay, so we just learned that the price of a currency is its exchange rate. And whenever we're measuring exchange rates, we're always referencing the value of one currency in comparison to another. So when a currency becomes more valuable or more expensive in terms of other currencies, we're going to say it appreciates. And when a currency's value falls, it depreciates. Now, economists use these specialized terms in order to avoid confusion. So from now on, don't say increase, decrease. When we're talking about currency rates specifically, we will always say that if the price increases, then it appreciates. And if the exchange rate decreases, then it depreciates. Now take a look at the top of the slide. And it will give you the exchange rate between the US dollar and the euro as of, for most of you, yesterday, April 10th. So notice that 1 US dollar was exchanged for 0.81 euros. Or another way to think of it is that 1 euro will get you $1.24. Now compare that to a year ago when I did this lesson. And a year ago, 1 US dollar was exchanged for 0.93 euro, or 1 euro gave you $1.08. So based off this information, I want you to try to conclude what has happened to the value of the US dollar within the past year. Has the US dollar appreciated or depreciated? The answer is that it depreciated. And the reason that we know this is the easiest way to figure it out is by deciding, did the US dollar get more or less expensive? So if I'm a European and I am exchanging my euros for US dollars, then last year I would have only gotten $1.08. This year I now get $1.24, which means that the price or cost of my euro is now more expensive today than it was a year ago. Conversely, the US dollar has depreciated because the value has decreased. Because last year I used to get 0.93 euros for every $1. This year I only get 0.81 euros. Now, these exchange rates are constantly fluctuating, and without me looking at the overall trends throughout this entire year, this could be a fluke, this could not be the norm, but as a whole, you're going to see that these exchange rates affect the relative price of products, thus impacting trade, and that is why they are so important. Because if the exchange rate changes and makes your currency either more or less valuable, it also makes your currency more or less expensive. And since I need to purchase your foreign-made products with your foreign currency, if your currency value is more expensive, then that therefore means that your foreign-made products are also more expensive. And if your products are more expensive, I'm less likely to purchase them. For example, say that I am a nation in Europe. Say that I'm France and I need to decide where I want to purchase my steel. Two main steel producers are the United States and China. Do I purchase my steel from the United States or do I purchase my steel from China? Let's say other things being equal, they're the same quality product and they're basically the same price. However, when I compare the values of the Chinese yuan with the values of the US dollar, the euro has a much better exchange rate with the yuan than it does with the US dollar. So if that's the case and the US dollar's currency is, or US currency is much more expensive than the Chinese currency, Well, if I'm a businessman and I'm looking for a profit, then it's going to be a no-brainer. I'm going to choose the Chinese steel because it is comparatively less expensive than the US steel. Again, not because of the actual price, but because of the exchange rates. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start drawing our key graph number 9, our FOREX market. And for this key graph, we actually need to draw two single market graphs, one of the US currency, and then we're going to compare it to another currency. And remember, the reason why is that the only way that we know what the price of our currency is by comparing it to the value of the other currency. So go ahead and draw two single markets. One is going to be labeled the US dollar market. One is going to be labeled the Euro market. Notice that the euro is basically a C with two lines in the middle of it. Kind of looks like an E. But know that it could be any other currency that we're comparing the dollar in value with. If at any point you guys need to pause in order to catch up, please do so. I'm going to keep on going. So we've got our x-axis. That's always going to be our quantity. I'm specifying here that we've got the quantity of dollars versus the quantity of euros. And then our y-axis is the price of whatever good we are measuring. But remember, our price for our currencies is called our exchange rate. So the exchange rate of the US dollar, or the price of the US dollar, is how many euros per 1 US dollar. So that's why we put euros over the dollar. That's only the tricky part. Make sure that if you forget, you can either think of it as, remember, how many US dollars or how many euros does it take to get 1 US dollar, or you can think this is the denominator. The dollar is under here, and also the dollar sign is below the x-axis. So we've got below and below. The same is going to be true in reverse for the euro. The cost of the euro is how many dollars to get 1 euro. And then we need to draw a upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve. Now, whenever we are talking about the suppliers and demanders of a currency, the suppliers of a currency are always going to be the people that already have that currency. So the suppliers of the US dollar are Americans because we get paid in US dollars. The demanders of US dollars in this circumstance are going to be the Europeans because they're the ones that are going to need to exchange their euros for US dollars anytime they want to purchase American-made products. And conversely, we are the demanders of euros because we don't have any, and whenever we want to purchase European products, we've got to get some euros. And the Europeans are the ones that supply those euros. Now, whenever we see a change in either the demand or supply of a certain currency, we're going to end up seeing what has happened to its exchange rate. So, if we were to see a rightward shift of demand or a leftward shift of supply, then we would see the US dollar appreciate. Let's see, that was my dog that just sneezed. And if we see the demand of the dollar decrease or the supply of the dollar increase, then we would see our exchange rate depreciate. So make sure you go ahead and draw in our equilibrium quantity and our equilibrium exchange rate and show how an upward arrow would lead to appreciation, downward depreciation, and notice how it's the exact same thing on the right-hand side with the euro. Okay, next we're looking at our shifters, and then we've just got 3 rules that we need to follow for our Forex market. So shifters, first is taste. Remember, this could be taste or preferences. This is your easy demand shifter. if if we see that there's an increase in demand for Samsung phones, then we're going to need to hold on to a greater quantity of Korean won in order to purchase that Samsung phone. If conversely, more people want Apple products, then they're going to need to exchange their US dollars for, their foreign currency for US dollars. So changes in demand of certain products can change the demand of certain foreign currencies. Price level. In general, if a nation is experiencing inflation, then they are going to see price increases in their domestic products. And so they're probably going to purchase those products abroad where there's more stable prices and less inflation. Conversely, if I see inflation happening in another country and their prices are going up, I'm probably not going to purchase products from that country. Income. Remember that income also can mean GDP or both your personal income but also national income. So that means that anytime you see a change in either individual income or in the nation's income as a whole, so the nation's economy is growing, then they are going to be wealthier than they were before. And when you're wealthier, you're able to afford more products, including foreign-made products. So you would see an increase in the demand of foreign currencies to purchase those foreign-made products. Last one is interest rates. Whenever we see interest rates being a shifter, it's specifically referencing savings. We're talking about that capital inflow that we learned about yesterday. So if we see interest rates rise in Great Britain, then conversely, I'm going to want to exchange my US dollars for more pounds in order to purchase British financial assets that's going to yield me a higher return on my savings. Okay, the 3 rules that we need to know. 1, if there's a change in the demand on one graph, there's going to be a change in supply on the other graph. Always. Supply and demand also always move in the same direction. If supply increases on one graph, then demand will increase on the other graph. 3rd rule is that when one currency appreciates, the other will depreciate. Hands down, this will always happen. The reason why is that we are always comparing the value of one currency to the other. So if one currency's value rises in comparison to the other currency, then we know that the other currency's value must be falling. So you can pretty quickly check to see if you're right or wrong, because if you got the answer that both currencies are appreciating or depreciating, you know you did something wrong with one of your shifts. The last thing that's really important, and it's kind of the whole point of this lesson, is that if one currency appreciates, then that means that now all of those products in that country are going to be more expensive to foreigners, which therefore means that their net exports will decrease, right? If certain foreign-made products become more expensive because the exchange rate is higher, then I'm going to buy less foreign-made products at that higher price. Conversely, if the exchange rate has depreciated and that currency is relatively cheap, then that's going to make the products of that country also relatively cheap, and therefore their net exports would increase. Okay, to sum it up, the rate at which the quantity demanded of a currency is equal to the quantity supplied of a currency is our equilibrium exchange rate. So demand shifts can cause the exchange rate to appreciate or depreciate. And remember, any change in the financial account creates an equal or opposite reaction in the current account, maintaining that current account plus financial account equals 0. And the movements in the exchange rate ensures that the financial account and the current account offset one another. So let me explain how this works in sum. So if we see an increase in capital flow into the United States, then that means that, going back to our euro versus dollar example, then that means that Europeans are demanding more US dollars to purchase our American financial assets. That's going to lead to an increase in the demand of the US dollar, and therefore the US dollar will appreciate. When the US dollar appreciates, conversely, the European euro will depreciate. And the reason why is that if they are demanding all these US dollars, they've got to exchange some euros in exchange for those US dollars. So you're going to see an increase in the supply of euros. When you increase the supply of euros, that depreciates the euro. And so remember that the US dollar is appreciated. When the US dollar appreciates, this then will make all of our goods and services, our exports, more expensive, and therefore it will decrease our US net exports. So remember, if we see capital inflow, that will increase our financial account, but it also appreciates our currency, which makes our net exports more expensive and therefore decreases our net exports and our current account. Now, I know that's a lot of steps, so if you need to rewind and re-listen to that, you can, but each time you do it, you're going to notice that whenever the financial account increases, you'll see the current account decrease as a result of that change in value of currencies, or vice versa. So now go ahead and take out your Forex market practice problems if you don't have them handy, and let's read these directions together. So you're going to set up a graph for each currency with the US dollar always being on the left-hand side. That's just for consistency purposes. And then you're going to show how the event affects the markets of both currencies. Now, the key here is to only figure out the initial reaction for or the consequence of that event. One of the problems that students have with the Forex practice is that they'll say, well, it originally appreciates, but then that would mean later it would depreciate, so I don't know which one you want me to say. The answer is always the very first reaction to the event. If you start thinking about the subsequent 5 reactions, you're probably not going to get the right answer. Once you've graphed each of the problems, then you're going to mark whether the currency has appreciated or depreciated in value. And lastly, state what has happened to U.S. net exports after that change. So as a result of that change in the value of those currencies, what has happened to U.S. net exports? So the first market, we've got the US dollar and the Mexican peso. The Mexican peso also uses the same symbol as the US dollar, so you'll want to differentiate those and label US and then the dollar sign and then the M and the dollar sign. So go ahead and give yourself a second to set up both markets in equilibrium. You can utilize your key graph number 9 as a reference point to make sure you set it up correctly. And then once you are done, unpause it. So the event is that drug wars in Mexico caused U.S. tourists to stay away from Mexico. So think for a second, what does this mean? What does this have to do with currencies? What currency is not going to be wanted any longer or wanted more? The answer should be that the demand for the Mexican peso will decrease because they no longer are experiencing as many American tourists entering their country, right? So if we see a decrease in the demand of Mexican pesos, then that also means we're going to see a decrease in the supply of the US dollar. Now, one reason is because that's the rule that I just told you a minute ago. But the reason for this is it's easier to think conversely. So, what if drug wars stopped and now tourism started rising? So, all of a sudden, Americans would want more Mexican pesos in that circumstance, right? Because they'd like to take a lovely vacation to Mexico. In order for Americans to receive Mexican pesos, they first need to give up their American US dollars, which means that you're going to see an increase in the supply of US dollars. But since we are decreasing our demand of the Mexican peso, we will see a corresponding decrease in supply of the US dollars because Americans are not supplying their currency on the exchange market at the rate that they used to. So go ahead and draw that decrease in supply of US dollars and decrease in demand of Mexican pesos and figure out what has happened to the exchange rates of both currencies. And we're going to go ahead and figure our results. So let's scroll down here to our handy dandy key. Oops, I thought I had the key on this one. I don't. I will just tell you, and then I'll show you a picture in a second. Okay, so the answer is that the US dollar appreciates, the Mexican peso depreciates, and because the US dollar appreciates, again, remember that means that American products are more expensive, which means that our US net exports will decrease. Okay, let's try another one. Number 2. Okay, number 2, we've got the US dollar, and once again, the European euro. And this time, the event is that the US goes into a deep recession and Europe does not. So pause and set up your graphs so that they are ready to go. Please don't cut any corners. Make sure you put those perpendiculars and label your equilibrium quantity, equilibrium exchange rate. So if the US goes into a deep recession, remember that when we're in a recession, our GDP decreases and our income decreases, right? We don't have as much money as we used to have. This is one of our shifters. So if we see an increase in income, then we are less wealthy than we used to be, which means we can't afford to buy as many products as we used to be able to buy. So since we can't afford as much as we used to, what's going to happen to the demand of us purchasing European products? The answer is that we will see a decrease in the demand of European products, which means we'll also see a decrease in demand of the euro. So it's going to look just like the last one you did, but just for different shifter reasons. So we'll see a decrease in the demand of the euro and a decrease in supply of the US dollar, which means that the US dollar will appreciate, the euro will depreciate, and American net exports will decrease. Now, I do have all of these drawn out on a key. It's the one that's labeled key, that the hyperlink on the website. So please feel free to look at that. But remember, try to give yourself the opportunity to figure it out on your own before you just look at the key. And if you have any questions, make sure you come to tutorials so that I can help you out. Remember, you want to feel pretty confident with this because we're going to keep on moving next week with new content. So next Monday is going to be your key graph number 9 quiz. So make sure you study that. And then we'll have a checkpoint quiz that Tuesday, including foreign exchange rates. So just make sure that you're keeping up with everything, you're working hard, you're asking questions, and I will see you when I see you.